Okay, so in this question, you are given a graph of a line, okay? And the question says, what is the y-intercept of this equation? We want to figure out what the y-intercept is equal to. Now, if you remember, this horizontal line here is the x-axis, and the vertical line is the y-axis. So we have a line that's represented with the blue color here, okay? And as we can see, the line passes through the x-axis and then it passes through the y-axis, as you can see there. The y-intercept is the point where the line touches or passes through the y-axis, okay? So the coordinate of this would be a point where x is always equal to 0. Okay, if x is 0, we know that it's going to be anywhere on the y-axis. It's going to touch the y-axis. So the coordinate, we always read the coordinate 0 and then whatever the y value is. Okay, so you want to look at your line and you want to see when does it hit the y-axis right here. That's the point where the line hits the y-axis. So how would we write this point as a coordinate? Well, we would start with 0, right? Because we know when we label coordinates, we always label them x, y, and x has to be 0. And y would be, if this is 6 and this is 8, then it would be 7. So the answer to this, the y-intercept is equal to 0, 7. Okay, what if I ask you what the x-intercept is? So it's the same idea. It's the point of the line that touches or passes through the x-axis. Okay, so it's the same idea here, except it goes through the x-axis. So we're going to look at the line. Again, we know that this is the y-intercept. So we're going to extend the line and we're going to see when does it hit right here. It hits, remember this is the x-axis. So that's the point where it hits the x-axis right here. Now, for this, the way we write the coordinate for an x-intercept, we're trying to figure out what value x is, but y in this case always has to be 0. We will read this coordinate something, but then the y value always has to be 0 because it's not going up or down. Okay, so we're just going to estimate here because it's kind of hard to read this. We'll say that the x-intercept is negative 2.2 approximately, 0. Okay, so that is the x-intercept. And I won't give you a question that involves decimals, but for this example, we're just going to estimate. And make sure you're looking to see if it's a positive or negative, right? This is the origin. And as you can recall, anything to the right of the origin is positive and anything to the left of the origin is negative. Anything above the origin going up is positive and below is negative, just to remember that. Okay, and when you're submitting your answers, okay, for y-intercept, when you put your answer in, you can just put 7. Okay, you don't have to write it as a coordinate. And when you're putting in the answer for x-intercept, you can just put the number. In this case, it would be negative 2.2. And you don't have to write it as a coordinate. Okay, just for the purpose of that quiz that we were doing. Okay, so looking at the same graph, and I've just made it cleaner here so we can see it. We know what the y-intercept is. I'm going to write that down again. The y-intercept is equal to 7, or we can write it as a coordinate, 0, 7. And we know the x-intercept is equal to, we rounded it to negative 2.2 or negative 2.20. Now we want to figure out what is the slope of this line. And if you remember, slope is equal to rise over run. And the rise is the distance in the y values. So it's the vertical distance, and the run is the distance, the difference in the x values. It's the horizontal distance. So we can just pick any 2 points on the line that are easy to read. So let's pick this point because it's exactly 7. And let's pick this point here, okay? This point would be located at, this would be negative 1 and 4, right? X is negative 1 and y is 4. And then this point is 0, 7. So I don't know if you remember how to calculate the slope. There's 2 ways we can do this. The first, we can actually just count the rise and the run. So we're going to count up from this point. What does it rise by? Now we have to be careful here because looking at the scale, if I jump 2 squares, I'm going up by 1. So this is a rise of 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this actually has a rise of 3. And then to get from here to here, let's look at our x-axis. When we skip 2 squares, it increases or decreases by 1. Okay, does everyone understand what I did there? Because of the way I labeled the graph and I made the scale, every 2 squares is a jump of 1, not 2. Okay, you have to be careful with the scale. So again, the rise is 3 and the run is 1, so I would write my slope as 3 over 1. Now, another way you could do this, if you remember what we learned a few weeks ago, we can use the slope formula. Remember, slope is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. It's the difference in the y values divided by the difference in the x values. So let's look at our x and y. And I'm going to call this 2 and 1. Coordinate 2, coordinate 1. So we're just going to subtract the y values. So I'm going to subtract 7, take away 4, divided by 0, take away -1. Don't forget to include the sign. So 7 take away 4 is 3, and 0 take away negative means we add 1. What's 3 divided by 1? 3. So the slope is equal to 3, and that's the same thing we got over here. Slope is equal to 3. So you can do it either way, okay? So now we know the slope is 3 and the y-intercept is 7. How would we write the equation? That's going to be another question you're going to be asked on the quiz. Equation of the line. Now, if you remember, equation of the line is written in the form y equals mx plus b. Let's review that for a minute. The slope was 3, so that's our m. And the y-intercept was 7, so that's our b. So let's plug it in. Okay, so whenever you're writing an equation of a line, it's always going to be in the form y equals mx plus b. This is called slope-intercept form. Okay, it can be in other forms, but we're writing it in slope-intercept form. In slope-intercept form, it looks like this, meaning that y is isolated, m is represented by the slope. So the slope is always the number in front of x. So it's the coefficient of x. Whatever number's in front of x will represent the slope. And then b, which is our constant term, meaning it's the number by itself, is always the y-intercept. This x and y represent a coordinate. That can just be used as any coordinate on the line. So we're not going to worry about replacing that right now. When you're writing the equation of a line, so to write an equation of a line in slope-intercept form, just replace m and replace b. Okay, so we leave the y and the x. We leave the y and the x, and we just replace the m. So do you remember what our slope was? Let's go back to the question. Y equals 3, because our m was 3, and our b was 7, and it was positive, so it would be plus 7. That's it. That's the equation of that line. Y equals 3x plus 7, and that's it. Okay, so those are the 3 things that you need to know for that quiz, and we'll talk a little bit more about linear equations later on, okay?